What did you discover?
Growled the voice of Ugluk.
Westwards. All's clear now. Now, I dare say, but how long? You fools. You should have shot him. He'll raise the alarm. The cursed horse breeders will hear of us by morning. Now we'll have to leg it. Double quick.
A shadow bent over Pippin. It was Ugluk.
Sit up,
said the orc.
My lads are tired of lugging you about. We have got to climb down, and you must use your legs. Be helpful now. No crying out, no trying to escape. We have ways of paying for tricks that you won't like. Though they won't spoil your usefulness for the master.
He cut the thongs round Pippin's legs and ankles, picked him up with his hair and stood him on his feet. Pippin fell down and Ugluk dragged him up by his hair again. Several orcs laughed. Ugluk thrust a flask between his teeth and poured some burning liquid down his throat. He felt a hot, fierce glow flow through him. The pain in his legs and ankles vanished. He could stand.
Now for the other one,
said Ugluk. Pippin saw him go to Merry, who was lying close by, and kick him. Merry groaned. Seizing him roughly, Ugluk pulled him into a sitting position and tore the bandage off his head. Then he smeared the wound with some dark stuff out of a small wooden box. Merry cried out and struggled wildly. The orcs clapped and hooted.
Can't take his medicine!
They jeered.
You know what's good for him? Aye! We shall have some fun later!
But at that moment, Ugluk was not engaged in sport. He needed speed and had to humor unwilling followers. He was healing Merry in orc fashion, and his treatment worked swiftly. When he had forced a drink from his flask down the hobbit's throat, cut his leg bonds and dragged him to his feet, Merry stood up, looking pale but grim and defiant, and very much alive. The gash in his forehead gave him no more trouble, but he bore a brown scar to the end of his days.
Hello, Pippin.
He said.
So you've come on this little expedition too? Where do we get bed and breakfast?
Now then,
said Ugluk.
none of that. Hold your tongues. No talk to one another. Any trouble will be reported at the other end, and he'll know how to pay you. You'll get bed and breakfast, all right. More than you can stomach.
The orc band began to descend a narrow ravine, leading down into the misty plain below. Merry and Pippin, separated by a dozen orcs or more, climbed down with them. At the bottom they stepped onto grass, and the hearts of the hobbits rose.
Straight on!
Shouted Ugluk.
West, and a little north. Follow the bush.
What are we going to do at sunrise?
Said some of the northerners. Said Ugluk.
Grass and wait for the whiteskins to join the picnic. Run with me behind you.
Said Ugluk.
Run! Or you'll never see your beloved holes again. By the white hand! What's the use of sending out mountain maggots on a trip only half tried?
Then the whole company began to run with the long loping strides of orcs. They kept no order, thrusting, jostling, and cursing. Yet their speed was very great. Each hobbit had a guard of 3. Pippin was far back in the line. He wondered how long he would be able to go on at this pace. He had had no food since the morning. One of his guards had a whip, but at present the orc liquor was still hot in him. His wits, too, were wide awake. Every now and again there came to his mind, unbidden, a vision of the keen face of Strider bending over a dark trail and running behind. But what could even a ranger see except a confused trail of orc feet? His own little prince and Merry's were overwhelmed by the trampling of the iron-shod orcs before them and behind them and about them. They had gone only a mile or so from the cliff when the land sloped down into a wide, shallow depression, where the ground was soft and wet. Mist lay there, pale glimmering in the last rays of the sickle moon. The dark shapes of the orcs in front grew dim, and then were swallowed up. Shouted Ugluk from the rear. A sudden thought leapt into Pippin's mind. and he acted on it at once. He swerved aside to the right and dived out of the reach of his clutching guard, head first into the mist. He landed sprawling on the grass. He yelled Ugluk. There was for a moment turmoil and confusion. Pippin sprang up and ran, but the orcs were after him. Some suddenly loomed up right in front of him.
No hope of escape,
Thought Pippin.
but there is a hope that I have left some of my own marks unspoiled on the wet ground.
He groped with his two tied hands at his throat and unclasped the brooch of his cloak. Just as long arms and hard claws seized him, he let it fall.
There, I suppose it will lie until the end of time.
He thought.
I don't know why I did it, but if the others have escaped, they've probably all gone with Frodo.
A whip thong curled around his legs, and he stifled a cry.
Enough!
Said Ugluk, running up.
He's still got to run a long way yet. Make 'em both run. Just use the whip as a reminder. But that's not all.
He snarled, turning to Pippin.
I shan't forget. Payment is only put off. Look at!
Neither Pippin nor Merry remembered much of their later part of the journey. Evil dreams and evil waking were blended into a long tunnel of misery, with hope growing ever fainter behind. They ran, and they ran, striving to keep up the pace set up by the orcs. Licked every now and again with a cruel thong cunningly handled. If they halted or stumbled, they were seized and dragged for some distance. The warmth of the orc draught had gone. Pippin felt cold and sick again. Suddenly he fell face downward on the turf. Hard hands with thrending nails gripped him and lifted him. He was carried like a sack once more, and darkness grew about him. Whether the darkness of another night or a blindness of his eyes, he could not tell. Dimly he became aware of voices, clamoring. It seemed that many of the orcs were demanding a halt. Ugluk was shouting. And he felt himself flung to the ground, and he lay as he fell, till black dreams took him. But he did not long escape from pain. Soon the iron grip of merciless hands was on him again. For a long time he was tossed and shaken, and then slowly the darkness gave way, and he came back to the waking world, and found that it was morning. Orders were shouted, and he was thrown roughly on the grass. There he lay for a while, fighting with despair. His head swam, but from the heat in his body he guessed that he had been given another draught. An orc stooped over him, and flung him some bread and a strip of raw dried flesh. He ate the stale grey bread hungrily, but not the meat. He was famished, but not yet so famished as to eat flesh flung from him by an orc. The flesh of he dared not guess what creature. He sat up and looked about. Merry was not far away. They were by the banks of a swift narrow river. Ahead mountains loomed. A tall peak was catching the first rays of the sun. A dark smudge of the forest lay on the lower slopes before them. There was much shouting and debating among the orcs. A quarrel seemed on the point of breaking out again between the Northerners and the Isengarders. Some were pointing back away south, and some were pointing eastward.
Very well,
Said Ugluk.
leave them to me. No, as I've told you before, but if you want to throw away what we've come all the way to get, throw it away. I'll look after it. Let the fighting Uruk-hai do the work, as usual. If you're afraid of the Whiteskins, run! Run as the forest!
He shouted, pointing ahead.
Get to it! It's your best hope. Off you go, and quick, before I knock a few more heads off, to put some sense into the others!
There was some cursing and scuffling, and then most of the Northerners broke away and dashed off. Over 100 of them, running wildly along the river towards the mountains. The hobbits were left with the Isengarders, a grim, dark band. 80 at least of large, swart, slant-eyed orcs, with great bows and short, broad-bladed swords. A few of the larger and bolder Northerners remained with them.
Now, we'll deal with Grishnak,
said Ugluk. But some of his own followers were looking uneasily southwards.
I know.
Growled Ugluk.
The cursed horse boys have gone wind of us. But that's all your fault, Slugger. You and the other scouts ought to have your ears cut off. But we are the fighters. We'll feast on horseflesh yet. Or something better.
At that moment, Pippin saw why some of the troop had been pointing eastward. From that direction there now came hoarse cries, and there was Grishnak again, and at his back a couple of score of others like him. Long-armed, crooked-legged orcs. They had a red eye painted on their shields. Ugluk stepped forward to meet them.
You've come back,
He said.
Thought better of it, eh?
Return to see that orders are carried out and the prisoners safe.
Answered Grishnak.
Indeed.
Said Ugluk.
Waste of effort. I'll see that orders are carried out in my command. And what else did you come back for? You went in a hurry. Did you leave anything behind?
Left a fool.
Snarled Grishnak.
But there were some stout fellows with him that are too good to lose. I knew you'd lead them into a mess. I've come to help them.
Splendid!
Laughed Ugluk.
And unless you've got some guts for fighting, you've taken the wrong way. The birch was your road. The Whiteskins are coming. What's happened to your precious Nazgul? Has he had another mount shot under him? Now, if you had brought him along, that might have been useful. If these Nazgul are all that they make out. Nazgul. Nazgul.
Said Grishnak, shivering and licking his lips, as if the word had a foul taste that he savoured painfully.
You speak of what is deep beyond the reach of your muddy dreams, Ugluk.
He said.
Nazgul. All that they make out. One day you'll wish that you had not said that. Hey, friend.
He snarled fiercely.
You ought to know that they're the apple of the great eye. But the winged Nazgul, not yet. Not yet. He won't let them show themselves across the great river yet. Not too soon. They're for the war and other purposes.
You seem to know a lot.
Said Ugluk.
More than is good for you, I guess. Perhaps those at Logbirch might wonder how and why. But in the meantime, the Uruk-hai of Isengard can do the dirty work, as usual. Don't stand slavering there, get your rabble together. The other swine are legging it to the forest. You'd better follow. You wouldn't get back to the great river alive. Right off the mark! Now! I'll be on your heels.
The Isengarders seized Merry and Pippin again and slung them on their backs. Then the troops started off. Hour after hour they ran, pausing now and again only to sling the hobbits to fresh carriers, either because they were quicker and hardier, or because of some plan of Grishnak's. The Isengarders gradually passed through the orcs of Mordor, and Grishnak's folk closed in behind. Soon they were gaining also on the northerners ahead. The forest began to draw nearer. Pippin was bruised and torn. His aching head was grated by the filthy jowl in the hairy ear of the orc that held him. Immediately in front were bowed backs and tough, thick legs going up and down, unresting, as if they were made of wire and horn, beating out the nightmare seconds of an endless time. In the afternoon, Ugluk's troop overtook the northerners. They were flagging in the rays of the bright sun, winter sun shining in a pale, cool sky though it was. Their heads were down and their tongues lolling out. Jeered the Isengarders. A cry from Grishnak showed that this was not mere jest. Horsemen riding very swiftly had indeed been sighted, still far behind but gaining on the orcs, gaining on them like a tide over the flats on folk straying in a quicksand. The Isengarders began to run with a redoubled pace that astonished Pippin. A terrific spurt it seemed for the end of a race. Then he saw that the sun was sinking, falling behind the misty mountains. Shadows reached over the land. The soldiers of Mordor lifted their heads and also began to put on speed. The forest was dark and close. Already they had passed a few outlying trees. The land was beginning to slope upwards, ever more steeply. But the orcs did not halt. Both Ugluk and Grishnak shouted, spurring them on to a last effort.
They will make it yet. He will escape.
thought Pippin. And then he managed to twist his neck so as to glance back with one eye over his shoulder. He saw that riders away eastward were already level with the orcs, galloping over the plain. The sunset gilded their spears and helmets and glinted in their pale flowing hair. They were hemming the orcs in preventing them from scattering and driving them along the line of the river. He wondered very much what kind of folk they were. He wished now that he had learned more in Rivendell and looked more at maps and things. But in those days the plans of their journey seemed to be in more competent hands, and he had never reckoned with being cut off from Gandalf, or from Strider, and even from Frodo. All that he could remember about Rohan was that Gandalf's horse, Shadowfax, had come from that land. That sounded hopeful as far as it went.
But how will they know that we are not orcs?
He thought.
I don't suppose we've ever heard of hobbits down here. I suppose I ought to be glad that the beastly orcs look like being destroyed. I would rather be saved myself.
The chances were that he and Merry would be killed together with their captors, before ever the men of Rohan were aware of them. A few of the riders appeared to be bowmen, skilled at shooting from a running horse. Riding swiftly into range, they shot arrows at the orcs that straggled behind, and several of them fell. Then the riders wheeled away out of the range of the answering bows of their enemies, who shot wildly, not daring to halt. This happened many times, and on one occasion arrows fell among the Isengarders. One of them, just in front of Pippin, stumbled and did not get up again. Night came down, without the riders closing in for battle. Many orcs had fallen, but fully 200 remained. In the early darkness the orcs came to a hillock. The eaves of the forest were very near, probably no more than 3 furlongs away, but they could go no further. The horsemen had encircled them. A small band disobeyed Ugluk's command and ran towards the forest. Only 3 returned.
Well, here we are,
Sneered Grishnak.
Fine leadership. I hope the great Ugluk will lead us out again.
But
Ordered Ugluk, taking no notice of Grishnak.
you, Rugdush, get 2 others and strand guard over them. They are not to be killed unless the filthy whiteskins break through. Understand? As long as I'm alive, I want them. They are not to cry out, and they are not to be rescued. Bind their legs.
The last part of the order was carried out mercilessly, but Pippin found that for the first time he was close to Merry. The orcs were making a great deal of noise, shouting and clashing their weapons, and the hobbits managed to whisper together for a while.
I don't think much of this,
Said Merry.
I feel nearly done in. I don't think I could crawl away far, even if I was free.
Whispered Pippin.
I've got some. Have you? I don't think they've taken anything but our swords. Yes, I had a packet in my pocket,
Answered Merry.
but it must be better to crumbs. Anyway, I can't put my mouth in my pocket. You won't have to. I've...
But just then a savage kick warned Pippin that the noise had died down and the guards were watchful. The night was cold and still. All around the knoll on which the orcs were gathered, little watchfires sprang up, golden red in the darkness, a complete ring of them. They were within long bowshot, but the riders did not show themselves against the light, and the orcs wasted many arrows shooting at the fires, until Ugluk stopped them. The riders made no sound. Later in the night, when the moon came out of the mist, then occasionally they could be seen, shadowy shapes that glinted now and again in the white light, as they moved in ceaseless patrol.
They'll wait for the sun. Curse them.
Growled one of the guards.
Why don't we get together and charge through? What's old Ugluk think he's doing, I should like to know? I dare say you would.
Snarled Ugluk, stepping up from behind.
Meaning I don't think at all, eh? Curse you! You're as bad as the other rabble. The maggots and the apes of the leg birds. No good trying to charge with them. They'll just squeal and boat. And there are more than enough of these filthy horse boys to mop up our lot on the flat. There's only one thing those maggots can do. They can see like gimlets in the dark. But these whiteskins have better night eyes than most men, from what I've heard. And don't forget their horses! They can see the night breeze, or so it's said. Still, there's one thing the fine fellows don't know. Morhur and his lads are in the forest, and they'll show up any time now.
Ugluk's words were enough, apparently, to satisfy the Isengarders, but the other orcs were both dispirited and rebellious. They posted a few watchers, but most of them lay on the ground, resting in the pleasant darkness. It did indeed become very dark again, for the moon passed westward into thick cloud, and Pippin could not see anything a few feet away. The fires brought no light to the hillock. The riders were not, however, content merely to wait for the dawn and let their enemies rest. A sudden outcry on the east side of the knoll showed that something was wrong. It seemed that some of the men had ridden in close, slipped off their horses, crawled to the edge of the camp and killed several orcs, and then had faded away again. Ugluk dashed off to stop a stampede. Pippin and Merry sat up. Their guards, Isengarders, had gone with Ugluk, but if the hobbits had any thought of escape, it was soon dashed. A long, hairy arm took each of them by the neck and drew them close together. Dimly they were aware of Grishnak's great head and hideous face between them. His foul breath was on their cheeks. He began to paw them and feel them. Pippin shuddered as hard, cold fingers groped down his back.
Well, my little ones,
Said Grishnak in a soft whisper.
enjoying your nice rest, or not? A little awkwardly placed, perhaps. Some whips on one side, and nasty spears on the other. Little people should not meddle in affairs that are too big for them.
His fingers continued to grope. There was a light like a pale but hot fire between his eyes. The thought came suddenly into Pippin's mind, as if caught direct from the urgent thought of his enemy.
Krishna knows about the ring. He's looking for it. While Ugluk is busy, he probably wants it for himself.
Cold fear was in Pippin's heart, yet at the same time he was wondering what use he could make of Grishnak's desire.
I don't think you'll find it that way.
He whispered.
It isn't easy to find.
Find it!
Said Grishnak. His fingers stopped crawling and gripped Pippin's shoulder.
Find what? What are you talking about, little one?
For a moment Pippin was silent. Then suddenly in the darkness he made a noise in his throat.
Gollum. Gollum. Nothing. My precious.
He added. The hobbits felt Grishnak's fingers twitch. Hissed the goblin softly.
That's what he means, is it? Oh, very, very dangerous, my little ones.
Said Merry, now alert and aware of Pippin's guess.
And not only for us. Still, you know your own business best. Do you want it or not? And what will you give for it?
Do I want it? Do I want it?
Said Grishnak, as if puzzled, but his arms were trembling.
What would I give for it? What do you mean?
We mean
Said Pippin, choosing his words carefully.
that it's no good groping in the dark. We could have saved you time and trouble. But you must untie our legs first, or we'll do nothing and say nothing.
My dear tender little fools,
Hissed Grishnak.
everything you have and everything you know will be got out of you in due time. Everything. You wish there was more that could tell to satisfy the questioner. Indeed you will. Quite soon. We shan't hurry the inquiry. Oh dear, no. What do you think you've been kept alive for, my dear little fellows? Please believe me when I say that it was not out of kindness, and not even one of Ugluk's faults.
Said Merry. said Pippin. Said Merry. They felt the orc's arms trembling violently.
Curse you, you filthy vermin.
He hissed.
Untie your legs. I'll untie every string in your bodies. Huge, do you think I can search you to the bones? Search you. I'll cut you both you to quivering shreds. I don't need the help of your legs to get you away and have you all to myself.
Suddenly he seized them. The strength in his long arms and shoulders was terrifying, and he tucked them one under each armpit and crushed them fiercely into his sides. A great stifling hand was clapped over each of their mouths. Then he sprang forward, stooping low. Quickly and silently he went, until he came to the edge of the knoll. There, choosing a gap between the watchers, he passed like an evil shadow out into the night. Down the slope and away westward towards the river that flowed out of the forest. In that direction, there was a wide open space with only one fire. After going a dozen yards, he halted, peering and listening. Nothing could be seen or heard. He crept slowly on, bent almost double. Then he squatted and listened again. Then he stood up, as if to risk a sudden dash. At that very moment, the dark form of a rider loomed up right in front of him. A horse snorted and reared. A man called out. Grishnak flung himself on the ground flat, dragging the hobbits under him. Then he drew his sword. No doubt he meant to kill his captives rather than allow them to escape or to be rescued. But it was his undoing. The sword rang faintly and glinted a little in the light of the fire. Away to his left, an arrow came whistling out of the gloom. It was aimed with skill, or guided by fate, and it pierced his right hand. He dropped the sword and shrieked. There was a quick beat of hoofs, and even as Grishnak leapt up and ran, he was ridden down, and a spear passed through him. He gave a hideous, shivering cry, and lay still. The hobbits remained flat on the ground, as Grishnak had left them. Another horseman came riding swiftly to his comrade's aid. Whether because of some special keenness of sight or because of some other sense, the horse lifted and sprang lightly over them, but its rider did not see them, lying covered in their elven cloaks. Too crushed for the moment and too afraid to move. At last Merry stirred and whispered softly.
So far, so good. But how are we to avoid being spitted?
The answer came almost immediately. The cries of Grishnak had roused the orcs. From the yells and screeches that came from the knoll, the hobbits guessed that their disappearance had been discovered. Ugluk was probably knocking off a few more heads. Then suddenly, the answering cries of orc voices came from the right, outside the circle of watchfires, from the direction of the forest and the mountains. Mahur had apparently arrived and was attacking the besiegers. There was the sound of galloping horses. The riders were drawing in their ring close around the knoll, risking the orc arrows, so as to prevent any sortie, while a company rode off to deal with the newcomers. Suddenly Merry and Pippin realized that without moving, they were now outside the circle. There was nothing between them and escape. Said Merry.
If only we had our legs and hands free, we might get away. But I can't touch the knots. I can't bite them.
No need to try, said Pippin.
I was going to tell you, I've managed to free my hands. These loops are only left for show. You better have a bit of lembas first.
He slipped the cords off his wrists and fished out a packet. The cakes were broken, but good, still in their leaf wrappings. The hobbits each ate 2 or 3 pieces. The taste brought back to them the memory of fair faces and laughter and wholesome food in quiet days now far away. For a while they ate thoughtfully, sitting in the dark, heedless of the cries and sounds of battle nearby. Pippin was the first to come back to the present.
We must be off,
he said.
Half a moment.
Grishnak's sword was lying close at hand, but it was too heavy and clumsy for him to use, so he crawled forward, and finding the body of the goblin, he drew from its sheath a long sharp knife. With this he quickly cut their bonds.
Now for it,
he said.
When we've warmed up a bit, perhaps we shall be able to stand again and walk. But in many cases we had better start by crawling.
They crawled. The turf was deep and yielding, and that helped them, but it seemed a long and slow business. They gave the watchfire a wide berth, and wormed their way forward bit by bit until they came to the edge of the river, gurgling away in the black shadows under its steep banks. Then they looked back. The sounds had died away. Evidently Morhur and his lads had been killed or driven off. The riders had returned to their silent, ominous vigil. It would not last very much longer. Already the night was old. In the east, which had remained unclouded, the sky was beginning to grow pale.
We must get under cover,
said Pippin.
We shall be seen. It will not be any comfort to us if these riders discover that we are not orcs after we are dead.
He got up and stamped his feet.
Those cords have cut me like wires. But my feet are getting warm again. I should take it on now. What about you, Mary?
Mary got up.
Yes, he said. I can manage it. Lambus does put some heart in you. A more wholesome sort of feeling, too, than the heart of that orc draught. I wonder what it was made of. Better not now, I expect. Let's get a drink of water and to wash away the thought of it.
Not here. The banks are too steep,
said Pippin.
Forward now.
They turned and walked side by side slowly along the line of the river. Behind them the light grew in the east. As they walked, they compared notes, talking lightly in Hobbit fashion of the things that had happened since their capture. No listener would have guessed from their words that they had suffered cruelly, and been in dire peril, going without hope towards torment and death. Or that even now, as they knew well, they had little chance of ever finding friend or safety again.
Oh, you seem to have been doing well, Master Tuke,
said Merry.
You'll get almost a chapter in old Bilbo's book, if ever I get the chance to report to him. Good work. Especially guessing that hairy villain's little game, and playing up to him. But I wonder if anyone will ever pick up your trail and find that brooch. I should hate to lose mine, but I'm afraid yours is gone for good.
Oh, I shall have to brush up my toes if I am ever to get level with you. Indeed, Cousin Brandybuck is going in front now. This is where he comes in. I don't suppose you have much notion where we are, but I spent my time at Rivendell rather better. We are walking west along the Entwash. The butt end of the Misty Mountains is in front, and Fangorn Forest.
Even as he spoke, the dark edge of the forest loomed up straight before them. Night seemed to have taken refuge under its great trees, creeping away from the coming dawn.
Lead on, Master Brandybuck,
said Pippin.
Or lead back. We have been warned against Fangorn, but one so knowing will not have forgotten that,
answered Merry.
Seems better to me all the same than turning back into the middle of a battle.
He led the way in under the huge branches of the trees. Old beyond guessing they seemed. Great trailing beards of lichen hung from them, blowing and swaying in the breeze. Out of the shadows the hobbits peeped, gazing back down the slope. Little furtive figures that in the dim light looked like elf children in the deeps of time, peering out of the wild wood in wonder at their first dawn. Far over the great river and the brown lands, leagues upon leagues away, the dawn came, red as flame. Loud rang the hunting horns to greet it. The riders of Rohan sprang suddenly to life. Horn answered horn again. Merry and Pippin heard, clear in the cold air, the neighing of war horses and the sudden singing of many men. The sun's limb was lifted, an arc of fire, above the margin of the world. Then with a great cry the riders charged from the east. The red light gleamed on mail and spear. The orcs yelled and shot all the arrows that remained to them. The hobbits saw several horsemen fall, but their line held up on the hill and over it. End wheeled round and charged again. Most of the raiders that were left alive then broke and fled, this way and that, pursued one by one to the death. But one band, holding together in a black wedge, drove forward resolutely in the direction of the forest. Straight up the slope they charged towards the watchers. Now they were drawing near, and it seemed certain that they would escape. They had already hewn down the 3 riders that barred their way.
Ooh, we have watched too long,
said Merry.
There's Ugluk. I don't want to meet him again.
The hobbits turned and fled deep into the shadows of the wood. So it was that they did not see their last stand, when Ugluk was overtaken and brought to bay at the very edge of Fangorn. There he was slain at last by Eomer, the 3rd Marshal of the Mark, who dismounted and fought him sword to sword, and over the wide fields the keen-eyed riders hunted down the few orcs that had escaped and still had strength to fly. Then when they had laid their fallen comrades in a mound and had sung their praises, the riders made a great fire and scattered the ashes of their enemies. So ended the raid, and no news of it came ever back to either Mordor or Isengard. But the smoke of the burning rose high to heaven, and was seen by many watchful eyes. Meanwhile, the hobbits went with as much speed as the dark and tangled forest allowed, following the line of the running stream westward and up towards the slopes of the mountains, deeper and deeper into Fangorn. Slowly their fear of the orcs died away, and their pace slackened. A queer stifling feeling came over them, as if the air were too thin or too scanty for breathing. At last Merry halted.
We can't go on like this.
He panted.
I want some air. Let's have a drink at any rate,
said Pippin.
I'm parched.
He clambered on to a great tree root that wound down into the stream, and stooping drew up some water in his cupped hands. It was clear and cold, and he took many draughts. Merry followed him. The water refreshed them and seemed to cheer their hearts. For a while they sat together on the brink of the stream, dabbling their sore feet and legs, and peering round at the trees that stood silently about them. Rank upon rank, until they faded away into grey twilight in every direction.
I suppose you haven't lost us already,
said Pippin, leaning back against the great tree trunk.
We can at least follow the course of the stream, the Entwash or whatever you call it, and get out again the way we came. We could if our legs would do it,
said Merry.
And if we could breathe properly. Yes, it is all very dim and stuffy in here,
said Pippin.
It reminds me somehow of the old room in the great place of the Tukes away back in the Smales in Tuckborough. A huge place, where the furniture has never been moved or changed for generations. They say the old Tuke lived in it year after year, while he and the room got older and shabbier together. It has never been changed since he died, a century ago. And old Gerontius was my great-great-grandfather, and that puts it back a bit. But that is nothing to the old feeling of this wood. Look at all those weeping, trailing beards and whiskers of lichen. And most of the trees seem to be half covered with ragged, dry leaves that have never folded. Untidy. I can't imagine what spring would be like here, if it ever comes. Still, less spring cleaning. But the sun at any rate must peep in sometimes,
said Merry.
It does not look or feel at all like Bilbo's description of Mirkwood. Well, that was a dark and black and the home of dark black things. This is just dim, and frightfully treeish. You can't imagine animals living here at all, or staying for long. No, nor hobbits,
said Pippin.
And I don't like the thought of trying to get through either. Nothing to eat for 100 miles, I should guess. How are our supplies? Low,
said Merry.
We ran off with nothing but a couple of spare packets of lembas, and left everything else behind.
They looked at what remained of the elven cakes. Broken fragments for about 5 meagre days, that was all.
And not a wrap or blanket,
said Merry.
We shall be cold tonight, whichever way we go. Well, we better decide on the way now,
said Pippin.
The morning must be getting on.
Just then they became aware of a yellow light that had appeared some way further on into the wood. Shafts of sunlight seemed suddenly to have pierced the forest roof.
Hello,
said Merry.
The sun must have run into a cloud while we've been under these trees. Oh, and now she has run out again. Or else she was climbed high enough to look down through some opening. It isn't far. Let's go and investigate.
They found it was further than they thought. The ground was rising steeply still, and it was becoming increasingly stony. The light grew broader as they went on, and soon they saw that there was a rock wall before them. The side of a hill, or the abrupt end of some long route thrust out by the distant mountains. No trees grew on it, and the sun was falling full on its stony face. The twigs of the trees at its foot were stretched out stiff and still, as if reaching out to the warmth. Where all had looked so shabby and grey before, the wood now gleamed with rich browns, and with the smooth black greys of bark like polished leather. The boles of the trees glowed with a soft green like young grass. Early spring or a fleeting vision of it was about them. In the face of the stony wall there was something like a stair, natural perhaps, and made by the weathering and splitting of the rock, for it was rough and uneven. High up, almost level with the tops of forest trees, there was a shelf under a cliff. Nothing grew there but a few grasses and weeds at its edge, and one old stump of a tree with only 2 bent branches left. It looked almost like the figure of some gnarled old man standing there, blinking in the morning light.
Up we go,
said Mary joyfully.
Now for a breath of fresh air and a sight of the land.
They climbed and scrambled up the rock. If the stair had been made, it was for bigger feet and longer legs than theirs. They were too eager to be surprised at the remarkable way in which the cuts and sores of their captivity had healed and their vigor had returned. They came at length to the edge of the shelf, almost at the feet of the old stump. Then they sprang up and turned around with their backs to the hill, breathing deep and looking out westward. They saw that they had only come some 3 or 4 miles into the forest. The heads of the trees marched down the slopes towards the plain. There, near the fringe of the forest, tall spires of curling black smoke went up, wavering and floating towards them.
The wind's changing,
said Mary.
It's turned east again. It feels cool up here.
Yes,
said Pippin.
I'm afraid this is only a passing gleam and it will go grey again. What a pity! This shaggy old forest looks so different in the sunlight. I almost felt I liked the place.
Almost felt you liked the forest? That's good. That's uncommonly kind of you.
Said a strange voice.
Turn around and let me have a look at your faces. I almost feel that I dislike you both. But don't let us be hasty. Turn around.
A large knob-knuckled hand was laid on each of their shoulders, and they were twisted round, gently but irresistibly. Then 2 great arms lifted them up. They found that they were looking at the most extraordinary face. It belonged to a large, man-like, almost troll-like figure, at least 14 foot high, very sturdy, with a tall head and hardly any neck. Whether it was clad in stuff like green and grey bark, or whether that was its hide, was difficult to say. At any rate, the arms, at a short distance from the trunk, were not wrinkled, but covered with a brown, smooth skin. The large feet had 7 toes each. The lower part of the long face was covered with a sweeping grey beard, bushy, almost twiggy at the roots, thin and mossy at the ends. But at the moment the hobbits noted little but the eyes. These deep eyes were now surveying them, slow and solemn, but very penetrating. They were brown, shot with a green light. Often afterwards, Pippin tried to describe his first impression of them.
One felt as if there was an enormous weight behind them, filled up with ages of memory and long, slow, steady thinking. But their surface was sparkling with the present, like sun shimmering on the outer leaves of a vast tree, or on the ripples of a very deep lake. I don't know, but it felt as if something that grew in the ground, asleep you might say, or just a feeling itself as something between root tip and leaf tip, between deep earth and sky, had suddenly waked up and was considering you with the same slow care that it had given to its own inside affairs for endless years.
Murmured the voice, a deep voice, like a very deep woodwind instrument.
Very odd indeed. Do not be hasty. That is my motto. But if I had seen you before, I heard your voices. I like them. Nice little voices. They reminded me of something I cannot remember. If I had seen you before I heard you, I should have just trodden on you, taking you for little orcs, and found out my mistake afterwards. Very odd you are indeed, root and twig. Very odd.
Pippin, though still amazed, no longer felt afraid. Under those eyes he felt a curious suspense, but not fear.
Please,
He said,
who are you? And what are you?
a queer look came into the old eyes, a kind of weariness. The deep wells were covered over.
Now,
Answered the voice.
well, I am an Ent, or that is what they called me. Yes, Ent is the word. The Ent I am, you might say in your manner of speaking. Fangorn is my name according to some. Treebeard, others make it. Treebeard will do.
An end?
said Mary.
What's that? But what do you call yourself? What's your real name?
Ooh, now.
Replied Treebeard.
Ooh, now that would be telling. Not so hasty. And I am doing the asking. You are in my country. What are you, I wonder? I cannot place you. You do not seem to come in the old lists that I learned when I was young. But that was a long, long time ago. They may have made new lists. Let me see, how did it go? Now, the lore of living creatures. First name the four free peoples. Eldest of all, the elf children. Dwarf the delver, dark eyes houses. And the earthborn, old as mountains. Man the mortal, master of horses. Beaver the builder, Buck the leaper, Bear be hunter, Boar the fighter, Hound is hungry, Hare is fearful, Eagle in eyrie, Ox in pasture, Hart-horn crowned, Hawk is swiftest, Swan the whitest, Serpent coldest. How did it go? Rum-tum, rum-ti-tum, tum. Rum-tum, rum-tum, rum-ti-tum-tum. It was a long list. But anyway, you do not seem to fit in anywhere.
We always seem to have got left out of the old lists and the old stories.
Said Mary.
Yet we've been about for quite a long time. We're hobbits. Why not make a new line?
Said Pippin.
Half-grown hobbits, the hole dwellers. Put us amongst the four, next to man. The big people. And you've got it.
Not bad, not bad.
Said Treebeard.
That would do. So you live in holes, eh? Sounds very right and proper. Who calls you hobbits, though? That does not salvish to me. Elves made all the old words. They began it.
Nobody else calls us hobbits. We call ourselves that.
Said Pippin.
Oh, come now. Not so hasty. You call yourselves hobbits? But you should not go telling just anybody. You'll be letting out your own right names if you're not careful.
Oh, we aren't careful about that.
Said Mary.
As a matter of fact, I'm Brandybuck. Maria Doc Brandybuck. Though most people call me just Mary. And I'm a Duke. Peregrine Cook. But I'm generally called Pippin. Or even Pip.
But you are hasty folk, I see.
Said Treebeard.
I am honored by your confidence, but you should not be too free all at once. There are Ents and Ents, you know. Or there are Ents, things that look like Ents, but aren't, as you might say. I'll call you Mary and Pippin, if you please. Nice names. For I am not going to tell you my name, not yet at any rate.
A queer half-knowing, half-humorous look came with a green flicker into his eyes.
For one thing, it would take a long while. My name is growing all the time, and I've lived a very long, long time. So my name is like a story. Real names tell you the story of the things they belong to in my language, in the old Entish, as you might say. It is a very lovely language, but it takes a very long time to say anything in it, because we do not say anything in it unless it is worth taking.
A long time to say. And to listen to. But now...
And the eyes became very bright and present, seeming to grow smaller and almost sharp.
What is going on? And what are you doing in it all? I can see and hear and smell and feel a great deal from this. Ala la 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 rumba kamanda lindor burume. Excuse me. That is a part of my name for it. I do not know what the word is in the outside languages. You know, the thing that we are on, where I stand and look out on fine mornings and think about the sun and the grass beyond the wood, and the horses and the clouds and the unfolding of the world. What is going on? What is Gandalf up to? And these...
He made a deep rumbling noise like a discord on a great organ.
These orcs and young Saruman down at Isengard. I like news, but not too quick now.
There is quite a lot going on,
said Mary.
and even if we tried to be quick, it would take a long time to tell. But you told us not to be hasty. Ought we to tell you anything so soon? Would you think it rude if we asked what you were going to do with us and which side you are on? And did you know Gandalf?
Yes, I do know him. The only wizard that really cares about trees,
said Treebeard.
Do you know him?
Yes,
said Pippin sadly.
we did. He was a great friend. And he was our guide.
Then I can answer your other questions,
said Treebeard.
I am not going to do anything with you. Not if you mean by that, do something to you, without your leave. We might do some things together. I don't know about sides. I go my own way. But your way may go along with mine for a while. But you speak of Master Gandalf as if he was in a story that had come to an end.
Yes, we do.
Said Pippin sadly.
The story seems to be going on. But I'm afraid that Gandalf has fallen out of it.
Ooh, come now,
said Treebeard.
Ah, well.
He paused, looking long at the hobbits.
Well, I do not know what to say. Come now.
If you would like to hear more,
said Mary.
we will tell you. But it will take some time. Wouldn't you like to put us down? Couldn't we sit here together in the sun while it lasts? You must be getting tired of holding us up.
Tired? No, I am not tired. I do not easily get tired, and I do not sit down. I am not very bendable. But there, the sun is going in. Let us leave this. Did you say what you call it?
Hill?
Suggested Pippin.
Shelf? Step?
Suggested Mary. Treebeard repeated the words thoughtfully.
Hill. Yes, that was it. But it is a hasty word for a thing that has stood here ever since this part of the world was shaped. Never mind. Let us leave it and go.
Where shall we go?
Asked Mary.
Oh, to my home. Or one of my homes.
Answered Treebeard.
Is it far?
I do not know. You might call it far, perhaps. But what does that matter?
Well, you see, we have lost all our belongings.
Said Mary.
We have only a little food.
Oh, you need trouble about that,
said Treebeard.
I can give you a drink that will keep you green and growing for a long, long while. And if we decide to part company, I can set you down outside my country at any point you choose. Let us go.
Holding the hobbits gently but firmly, one in the crook of each arm, Treebeard lifted up first one large foot, and then the other, and moved them to the edge of the shelf. The root-like toes grasped the rocks, then carefully and solemnly he walked down from step to step and reached the floor of the forest. At once he set off with long, deliberate strides through the trees, deeper and deeper into the wood, never far from the stream, climbing steadily up towards the slopes of the mountains. Many of the trees seemed asleep, or as unaware of him as of any other creature that merely passed by, but some quivered, and some raised up their branches above his head as he approached. All the while as he walked, he talked to himself in a long, running stream of musical sounds. The hobbits were silent for some time. They felt, oddly enough, safe and comfortable, and they had a great deal to think and wonder about. At last, Pippin ventured to speak again.
Please, Treebeard,
He said,
could I ask you something? Why did Celeborn warn us against your forest? He told us not to risk getting entangled in it.
Did he now?
rumbled Treebeard.
And I might have said much the same if you had been going the other way. Do not risk getting entangled in the woods of Lorendin Lorenan. That is what the elves used to call it, but now they make the name shorter. Lothlorien, they call it. Perhaps they are right. Maybe it is fading, not growing. Land of the Valley of Sinking Gold, that was it, once upon a time. Now it is Dreamflower. Ah, well, but it is a queer place, and not for just anyone to venture in. I am surprised that you ever got out, but much more surprised that you ever got in. That has not happened to strangers for many a year. It is a queer land, and so is this. Folk have come to grief here. Aye, they have come to grief.
He hummed to himself.
They are falling rather behind the world in there, I guess.
He said,
Neither this country nor anything else outside the Golden Wood is what it was when Celeborn was young. Still, tal elilomea, tumbale morna, tumbale tariam, lomea nor. That is what they used to say. Things have changed, but it is still true in places.
What do you mean?
said Pippin.
What is true?
The trees and the ents.
Said Treebeard.
I do not understand all that goes on myself, so I cannot explain it to you. Some of us are still true ents, and lively enough in our fashion, but many are growing sleepy, going tree-ish, as you might say. Most of the trees are just trees, of course, but many are half awake. Some are quite wide awake, and few are, getting entish. That is going on all the time. When that happens to a tree, you find that some have bad hearts. Nothing to do with their wood, I do not mean that. Why, I knew some good old willows down the Entwash, gone long ago. Alas, they were quite hollow. Indeed, they were falling all to pieces. But as quiet and sweet-spoken as a young leaf. And then there are some trees in the valleys under the mountains, sound as a bell,
and burn right through. That sort of thing seems to spread. There used to be some very dangerous parts in this country. There are still some very black patches.
Like the old forest away to the north, do you mean?
asked Barry.
Aye, something like, but much worse. I do not doubt there is some shadow of the great darkness lying there still away north, and bad memories are handed down. But there are hollow dales in this land where the darkness has never been lifted, and the trees are older than I am. Still, we do what we can. We keep off strangers and the foolhardy, and we train and we teach. We walk and we weed. We are tree herds, we old ents. Few enough of us are left now. Sheep get like shepherd, and shepherds like sheep, it is said, but slowly, and neither have long. It is quicker and closer with trees and ents, and they walk down the ages together. For ents are more like elves, less interested in themselves than men are, and better at getting inside other things. Yet again, ents are more like men, more changeable than elves are, and quicker at taking the color of the outside, you might say. Or better than both, for they are steadier and keep their minds on things longer. Some of my kin look just like trees now, and need something great to rouse them. And they speak only in whispers. But some of my trees are limb-lithe, and many can talk to me. Elves began it, of course, waking trees up and teaching them to speak, and learning their tree talk. They always wished to talk to everything, the old elves did. But then the great darkness came and they passed away, over the sea, or fled into far valleys, and hid themselves, and made songs about days that would never come again. Never again. Aye. There was all one wood once upon a time, from here to the mountains of Loon, and this was just the east end. Those were the broad days. Time was when I could walk and sing all day, and hear no more than the echo of my own voice in the hollow hill. The woods were like the woods of Lothlorien, only thicker, stronger, younger. And the smell of the air, I used to spend a week just breathing.
Treebeard fell silent, striding along, and yet making hardly a sound with his great feet. Then he began to hum again, and passed into a murmuring chant. Gradually the hobbits became aware that he was chanting to them.
In the willow meads of Tazarinan, I walked in the spring. The sight and smell of spring in Nan Tazarion, and I said that it was good. I wandered in summer in the elm woods of Ossirian. The lights and the music in the summer by the 7 rivers of Ossir, and I thought that was best. To the beaches of Neldoreth I came in the autumn. The gold and the red, and the sighing of leaves in the autumn in Tauranan Eldor. It was more than my desire. To the pine trees upon the highland of Dorthonion I climbed in the winter, The wind and the whiteness and the black branches of winter upon Urunathon. My voice went up and sang in the sky. And now all those lands lie under the wave. And I walk in Ambarona, in Tauremorna, in Aldalome, my own land, in the country of Fangorn, where the roots are long, and the years lie thicker than the leaves, in Tauremorna Lome.
He ended, and strode on silently, and in all the wood, as far as ear could reach, there was not a sound. The day waned, and dusk was twined about the boles of the trees. At last the hobbits saw, rising dimly before them, a steep dark land. They had come to the feet of the mountains, and to the green roots of tall Methydras. Down the hillsides the young Entwash, leaping from its springs high above, ran noisily from step to meet them. On the right of the stream there was a long slope, clad with grass, now grey in the twilight. No trees grew there, and it was open to the sky. Stars were shining already in lakes between shores of cloud. Treebeard strode up the slope, hardly slackening his pace. Suddenly before them the hobbits saw a wide opening. 2 great trees stood there, one on either side, like living gateposts, but there was no gate, save their crossing and interwoven boughs. As the old Ent approached, the trees lifted up their branches, and all their leaves quivered and rustled, for they were evergreen trees, and their leaves were dark and polished, and gleamed in the twilight. Beyond them was a wide level space, as though the floor of a great hall had been cut in the side of the hill. On either hand the walls sloped upwards until they were 50 feet high or more, and along each wall stood an aisle of trees that also increased in height as they marched inwards. At the far end the rock wall was sheer, but at the bottom it had been hollowed back into a shallow bay with an arched roof, the only roof of the hall, save the branches of the trees, which at the inner end overshadowed all the ground, leaving only a broad open path in the middle. A little stream escaped from the springs above, and leaving the main water, fell tinkling down the sheer face of the wall, pouring in silver drops, like a fine curtain in front of the arched bay. The water was gathered again into a stone basin in the floor between the trees, and thence it spilled and flowed away beside the open path, out to rejoin the Entwash in its journey through the forest.
Here we are,
said Treebeard, breaking his long silence.
I have brought you about 70,000 Ent strides, but what that comes to in the measurement of your land I do not know. Anyhow, we are near the roots of the last mountain. Part of the name of this place might be Welling Hall, if it were turned into your language. I like it. We will stay here tonight.
He set them down on the grass between the aisles of the trees, and they followed him towards the great arch. The hobbits now noticed that as he walked, his knees hardly bent, but his legs opened with a great stride. He planted his big toes, and they were indeed big and very broad, on the ground first, before any other part of his feet. For a moment, Treebeard stood under the rain of the falling spring and took a deep breath. Then he laughed and passed inside. A great stone table stood there, but no chairs. At the back of the bay it was already quite dark. Treebeard lifted 2 great vessels and stood them on the table. They seemed to be filled with water, but he held his hands over them, and immediately they began to glow, one with a golden and the other with a rich green light, and the blending of the 2 lights lit the bay, as if the sun of summer was shining through a roof of young leaves. Looking back, the hobbits saw that the trees in the court had also begun to glow, faintly at first, but steadily quickening until every leaf was edged with light, some green, some gold, some red as copper, while the tree trunks looked like pillars moulded out of luminous stone.
Well, well, now we can talk again,
said Treebeard.
You are thirsty, I expect. Perhaps you are also tired. Drink this.
He went to the back of the bay, and then they saw that several tall stone jars stood there, with heavy lids. He removed one of the lids, and dripped in a great ladle, and with it filled 3 bowls. one very large bowl and 2 smaller ones.
This is an end house,
He said,
and there are no seats, I fear. But you may sit on the table.
Picking up the hobbits, he set them on the great stone slab, 6 feet above the ground, and there they sat, dangling their legs and drinking in sips. The drink was like water, indeed very like the taste of draughts that they had drunk from the Entwash near the borders of the forest, and yet there was some scent or savour in it which they could not describe. It was faint, but it reminded them of the smell of a distant wood borne from far away by a cool breeze at night. The effect of the draught began at the toes, and rose steadily through every limb, bringing refreshment and vigour as it coursed upwards, right to the tips of the hair. Indeed, the hobbits felt that the hair on their heads was actually standing up, waving and curling and growing. As for Treebeard, he first laved his feet in the basin beyond the arch, and then he drained his bowl at one draught. One long, slow draught. The hobbits thought he would never stop. At last he set the bowl down again. He sighed.
Now we can talk easier. You can sit on the floor, and I will lie down. That will prevent this drink from rising to my head and sending me to sleep.
On the right side of the bay there was a great bed on low legs, not more than a couple of feet high, covered deep in dried grass and bracken. Treebeard lowered himself slowly onto this, with only the slightest sign of bending at his middle, until he lay at full length, with his arms behind his head, looking up at the ceiling, upon which lights were flickering, like the play of leaves in the sunshine. Merry and Pippin sat beside him on pillows of grass.
Now tell me your tale, and do not hurry,
said Treebeard. The hobbits began to tell him the story of their adventures ever since they left Hobbiton. They followed no very clear order, for they interrupted one another continually, and Treebeard often stopped the speaker and went back to some earlier point or jumped forward asking questions about later events. They said nothing whatever about the ring, and did not tell him why they set out or where they were going to, and he did not ask for any reasons. He was immensely interested in everything, in the Black Riders, in Elrond and Rivendell, in the Old Forest and Tom Bombadil, in the mines of Moria, and in Lothlorien and Galadriel. He made them describe the Shire and its country over and over again. He said an odd thing at this point.
You never see any ents round there, do you?
He asked.
Well, not ents. Entwives, I should really say.
Entwives?
Said Pippin.
Are they like you at all?
Yes, well, no. I do not really know now.
Said Treebeard thoughtfully.
But they would like your country, so I just wondered.
Treebeard was, however, especially interested in everything that concerned Gandalf, and most interested of all in Saruman's doings. The hobbits regretted very much that they knew so little about them, only a rather vague report by Sam of what Galadriel had told to the council, but they were clear at any rate that Ugluk and his troop came from Isengard, and spoke of Saruman as their master. Said Treebeard, when at last their story had wound and wandered down the battle of the orcs and the riders of Rohan.
Well, that is a bundle of news and no mistake. You have not told me all, no indeed, not by a long way, but I do not doubt that you are doing as Gandalf would wish. There is something very big going on that I can see, and what it is, maybe, I shall learn in good time, or in bad time, by root and twig, but it is a strange business. Up sprout a little folk that are not of the old lists, and behold, the 9 forgotten riders reappear to hunt them, and Gandalf takes them on a great journey, and Galadriel harbors them in Caras Galathorn. and orcs pursue them down all the leagues of Wilderland. Oh, indeed. They seem to be caught up in a great storm. I hope they weather it.
And what about yourself?
asked Merry.
I have not troubled about the great wars,
said Treebeard.
They mostly concern elves and men. That is the business of wizards. Wizards are always troubled about the future. I do not like worrying about the future. I am not altogether on anybody's side, because nobody is altogether on my side, if you understand me. Nobody cares for the woods as I care for them. Not even elves nowadays. Still, I take more kindly to elves than to others. It was the elves that cured us of dumbness long ago, and that was a great gift that cannot be forgotten. Though our ways have parted since, and there are some things, of course, whose side I am altogether not on. I am against them altogether. These
He again made a deep rumble of disgust.
These orcs and their masters. I used to be anxious when the shadow lay on Mirkwood, but when it removed to Mordor, I did not trouble for a while. Mordor is a long way away. But it seems that the wind is setting east, and the withering of old woods may be drawing near. There is naught that an old ent can do to hold back that storm. We must weather it, or crack. But Saruman now. Saruman is a neighbor. I cannot overlook him. I must do something, I suppose. I have often wondered lately what I should do about Saruman.
Who is Saruman?
asked Pippin.
Do you know anything about his history?
Saruman is a wizard.
Answered Treebeard.
More than that I cannot say. I do not know the story of wizards. They appeared first after the great ships came over the sea. If they came with the ships, I never can tell. Saruman was reckoned great among them, I believe. He gave up wandering about and minding the affairs of men and elves. Some time ago, you would call it a very long time ago, and he settled down at Angrenost, or Isengard as the men of Rohan call it. He was very quiet to begin with, but his fame began to grow. He was chosen to be the head of the White Council, they say, but that did not turn out too well. I wonder now if even then Saruman was not turning to evil ways. But at any rate, he used to give no trouble to his neighbors. I used to talk to him. There was a time when he was always walking about my woods. He was polite in those days, always asking my leave, at least when he met me, and always eager to listen. I told him many things that he would never have found out by himself, but he never repaid me in like kind. I cannot remember that he ever told me anything. And he got more and more like that. His face, as I remember it, I have not seen it for many a day, became like windows in a stone wall. Windows with shutters inside. I think that I now understand what he is up to. He is plotting to become a power. He has a mind of metal and wheels, and he does not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him for the moment. And now it is clear that he is a black traitor. He has taken up with the Val folk, with the orcs. Worse than that, he has been doing something to them, something dangerous. For these Isengarders are more like wicked men. It is a mark of evil things that came in the great darkness that they cannot abide in the sun. But Saruman's orcs can endure it, even if they hate it. I wonder what he has done. Are they men that he has turned, or has he blended the races of orcs and men? And that would be a black evil.
Treebeard rumbled for a moment, as if he was pronouncing some deep subterranean entish malediction.
Some time ago I began to wonder how orcs dared to pass through my woods so freely.
He went on.
Only lately did I guess that Saruman was to blame, and that long ago he had been spying out all the ways and discovering my secrets. He and his foul folk are wreaking havoc now. Down on the borders they are felling trees. Good trees. Some of these trees they just cut down and leave to rot. Orc mischief that, but most are hewn up and carried off to feed the fires of Orthanc. There is always a smoke rising from Isengard these days. Curse him, root and branch. Many of those trees were my friends, creatures that I had known from nut and acorn. Many had voices of their own that are lost forever now. And there are wastes of stump and bramble where once were singing groves. I have been idle. I have let things slip. It must stop.
Treebeard raised himself from his bed with a jerk, stood up, and thumped his hand on the table. The vessels of light trembled and sent up 2 jets of flame. There was a flicker like green fire in his eyes, and his beard stood out stiff as a great besom.
I will stop it,
he boomed.
And you shall come with me. You may be able to help me. You will be helping your own friends that way too. For if Saruman is not checked, Rohan and Gondor will have an enemy behind as well as in front. Our roads go together. To Isengard.
We will come with you,
Said Merry.
We will do what we can.
Yes,
Said Pippin.
I should like to see the White Hand overthrown. I should like to be there, even if I could not be of much use. But I shall never forget Uglik and the crossing of Rohan.
Good. Good.
Said Treebeard.
But I spoke too hastily. We must not be hasty. I have become too hot. I must cool myself and think, for it is easier to shout stop than to do it.
He strode to the archway and stood for some time under the folding rain of the spring. Then he laughed and shook himself, and wherever the drops of water fell glittering from him to the ground, they glinted like red and green sparks. He came back and laid himself on the bed again, and was silent. After some time, the hobbits heard him murmuring again. He seemed to be counting on his fingers.
Finglas, Fladrif, hi.
He sighed.
The trouble is that there are so few of us left.
He said, turning towards the hobbits.
Only 3 remain of the first Ents that walked in the woods before the darkness. Only myself, Fangorn, and Finglas, and Fladrif. To give them their elvish names, you may call them Leaflock and Skinbark, if you like that better. And of us 3, Leaflock and Skinbark are not much use for this business. Leaflock has grown sleepy, almost tree-ish, you might say. He has taken to standing by himself half asleep all through the summer with the deep grass of the meadows round his trees. Covered with leafy hair he is. He used to rouse up in winter, but of late he has been too drowsy to walk far even then. Skingmark lived on the mountain slopes west of Isengard. That is where the worst trouble has been. He was wounded by the orcs, and many of his folk and his tree herds have been murdered and destroyed. He has gone up into the high places among the birches that he loves best, and he will not come down. Still, I dare say I could get together a fair company of our younger folks, if I could make them understand the need, if I could rouse them. We are not a hasty folk. What a pity there are so few of us.
Why are they so few when you have lived in this country so long?
asked Pippin.
Have a great many died?
Oh, no,
said Treebeard.
none have died from inside, as you might say. Some have fallen in the evil chances of the long years, of course, and more have grown tree-ish. But there were never many of us, and we have not increased. There have been no entings, no children, you would say, not for a terrible long count of years. You see, we lost the Entwives.
How very sad,
said Pippin.
How was it that they all died?
They did not die,
said Treebeard.
I never said died. We lost them, I said. We lost them, and we cannot find them. Oh,
He sighed.
I thought most folk knew that. There were songs about the hunt of the Ents, for the Entwives sung among elves and men, from Mirkwood to Gondor. They cannot be quite forgotten.
Well, I'm afraid the songs have not come west or over the mountains to the Shire,
said Merry.
Won't you tell us some more, or sing us some of the songs?
Oh, yes, I will indeed,
said Treebeard, seeming pleased with the request.
but I cannot tell it properly, only in short, and then we must end our talk. Tomorrow we have councils to call, and work to do, and maybe our journey to begin. It is rather a strange and sad story.
He went on after a pause.
When the world was young, and the woods were wide and wild, the Ents and the Entwives, and there were Ent maidens then. The loveliness of Fimrithil, of Wandlim the light-footed, in the days of our youth. They walked together, and they housed together. But our hearts did not go on growing in the same way. The Ents gave their love to things that they met in the world, and the Entwives their thought to other things. For the Ents loved the great trees, and the wild woods, and the slopes of the hills, and they drank of the mountain streams, and ate only such fruit as the trees let fall in their paths. And they learned of the elves, and spoke with the trees. And the Entwives gave their minds to the lesser trees, and to the meads and the sunshine beyond the feet of the forests, and they saw the sloe in the thicket, and the wild apple, and the cherry blossoming in spring, and the green herbs in the waterlands in summer. And the seedling grasses in the autumn fields. They did not desire to speak with these things, but they wished them to hear and obey what was said to them. The Entwives ordered them to grow according to their wishes, and bear leaf and fruit to their liking. For the Entwives desired order, and plenty, and peace. by which they meant that things should remain where they had set them. So the Entwives made gardens to live in, but we Ents went on wandering, and we only came to the gardens now and again. Then, when the darkness came in the north, the Entwives crossed the great river, and made new gardens and tilled new fields, and we saw them more seldom. After the darkness was overthrown, the land of the Entwives blossomed richly, and their fields were full of corn. Many men learned the crafts of the Entwives and honored them greatly, but we were only a legend to them, a secret in the heart of the forest. Yet here we still are, while all the gardens of the Entwives are wasted. Men call them the Brown Lands now. I remember it was long ago, in the time of the war between Sauron and the men of the sea. Desire came over me to see Fimbrethil again. Very fair she was still in my eyes when I had last seen her, though little like the Ent Maiden of old. For the Entwives were bent and brown by their labor, their hair parched by the sun to the hue of ripe corn, and their cheeks like red apples. Yet their eyes were still the eyes of our own people. We crossed over Anduin and came to their land, but we found a desert. It was all burned and uprooted, for war had passed over it, but the Entwives were not there. Long we called, and long we searched, and we asked all folk that we met which way the Entwives had gone. Some said they had never seen them, and some said that they had seen them walking away west, and some said east, and others south. But nowhere that we went could we find them. Our sorrow was very great. Yet the wildwood called, and we returned to it. For many years we used to go out every now and again and look for the Entwives, walking far and wide, calling them by their beautiful names. But as time passed, we went more seldom and wandered less far. And now the Entwives are only a memory for us. And our beards are long and grey. The elves made many songs concerning the search of the Ents, and some of the songs passed into the tongues of men. But we made no songs about it, being content to chant their beautiful names when we thought of the Entwives. We believe that we may meet again in a time to come, and perhaps we shall find somewhere a land where we can live together and both be content. But it is foreboded that that will only be when we have both lost all that we now have. And it may well be that that time is drawing near at last. For if Sauron alone destroyed the gardens, the enemy today seems likely to wither all the woods. There was an elvish song that spoke of this, or at least so I understand it. It used to be sung up and down the great river. It was never an Eltish song, mark you. It would have been a very long song in Entish, but we know it by heart, and hum it now and again.